Already embattled, the Pakistani Prime Minister faces charges of contempt over a corruption case involving the president. But who is the real target in this trial? And could this court case bring down the government? This is Inside Story. Welcome to the program. I'm Dareen Abu Ghaida. Pakistan's Prime Minister was in court Thursday. He was defending charges of contempt against him. Pakistan's Supreme Court gave Yousuf Raza Gilani 2 weeks to convince judges why he should not be prosecuted for failing to reopen corruption investigations against the president, Asif Ali Zardari. He argued that constitutionally the president is protected from any legal proceedings, thus giving him immunity. Now, the case was adjourned until February the 1st, but if he's found guilty, Gilani could face dismissal and even a possible prison sentence. Well, the corruption allegations against the president Zardari date back to 2003. That's when a Swiss court found him and his late wife Benazir Bhutto guilty of money laundering. But in 2007, Swiss authorities returned around $60 million to Zardari, and they then dropped the case at the request of the Pakistani government, part of an amnesty deal to fix the country's political problems. But in 2009, Pakistan's Supreme Court annulled that amnesty and it ordered the government to reopen the case against Zardari. The government did not, leading to the current contempt proceedings that we are seeing against Prime Minister Gilani. So what's behind Gilani's trial? For more on this, let's bring in our three guests. From Islamabad, Sohail Mahmood. He's a professor of political science at the International Islamic University. From Karachi, Talat Masood, retired general of the Pakistan Army and also former secretary in the Ministry of Defense. And over in Washington, D.C., we're joined by Richard Weitz, a senior fellow and director of the Center for Political as well as Military Analysis at the Hudson Institute. And Richard has also worked at the U.S. Department of Defense. I welcome all of you gentlemen to this edition of Inside Story. Lots to get through this evening. Sohail Mahmood, if I can start with you over in Islamabad. The Prime Minister, as we're saying, he's been given 2 weeks to come back to the Supreme Court and give his defense. What do you expect him to come back and say? Do you think that he will reopen the case against the Swiss court case against the president?
Yeah, I mean, there are all indications that Gilani and the government has decided to back off. They do not want any collision. I mean, things are getting very serious in other matters. So the People's Party government has decided, I mean, and their coalition partners, the ANP, the MQM, the PMLQ, they have been trying to press upon the government not to confront the Judiciary, the Supreme Court on this matter. So the indication is that, the Prime Minister is going to come up with a very flimsy excuse that the reason why he did not allow or permit the letter to be written to the Swiss authorities was because he thought that the president has immunity and the letter wouldn't be worth much. But that's just a flimsy excuse. The important thing is that they're going to back off. They're going to back off and...
Go ahead, they're going to back off, yes?
I mean, and they're simply saying that, we thought that it wouldn't make any sense for the letter to go through, and therefore we thought that it's not wise because, the president has immunity in international law and all sort of arguments.
Okay, let's put that to Talat Masood. Talat, do you share the view of Sohail there? What do you think is going to happen on February the 1st when the Supreme Court is back?
Well, I think the government will stick to its position because it's very clear by now the position that has been taken by both the Prime Minister as well as his lawyer. It seems that what they are going to say is that we haven't written to the Swiss authorities because in the Constitution the President has the immunity, and he has the immunity not only at the national level but also at the international level, and so there was no point in writing to the Swiss courts, and that for that reason we do not think that it is necessary to write to the Swiss authorities. Although they were extremely courteous, they were trying to be conciliatory. they were trying to be respectful. But as far as the content and the substance of the matter is concerned, they were sticking and adhering to their original position that President Zardari is immune because the Constitution does not allow any cases to be taken against the sitting president.
All right.
And they say that, well, when...
What about the Supreme Court then? What about the Supreme Court? Will it agree with that, or what will come out of the deliberations over the president's immunity, Talat?
Well, what I see is that in case the Supreme Court comes out with a verdict saying that no, in our interpretation, the president does not, enjoy immunity, at least as far as international courts are concerned, then they will have to write, and I think they will then agree, because there are also indications, as was mentioned by the lawyer in certain discussions, that he is quite willing now to write to the Swiss authorities, and I think that would then diffuse the situation. So I think they are prepared for both the alternatives, although they will continue to stick with their original position and try to sort of win their point. But I think the judiciary also will not let this happen. So I think it's a test of wills apart from anything else. But the point is that no institution, whether it be the judiciary or the military or the civilian political leadership, wants to cross certain limits and red lines which they have set for themselves. And as democracy is in transition, I think it's very interesting to note that whereas they are testing their boundaries, but they are not trying to overstep the boundaries. Let's
bring in Richard Weitz. I'd like to get your take on what's happening in Pakistan and the fate of the Prime Minister Gilani as well as President Zardari. And also, Richard, some say that this is a military-driven conspiracy to bring down the Pakistan government. Is this what's going on here, in your opinion?
Well, the second, your supplementary question about the military is important, because stepping back, what we have is a problem of institutional authority being contested by different branches of government. That can be productive. So, for example, in the United States, we have the Congress and the President and the courts continually battling over authority, continually checking and balancing one another. But in the case of Pakistan, you have a president and a prime minister in charge of a weak civilian government. You have a court which was very weak under President Musharraf, the previous military government of Pakistan, but is now reinvigorated and trying to exert its authority. As you mentioned, you also have a military which has a history of enjoying considerable autonomy within the Pakistani state. And from the perspective of Washington, there's a concern that means you're not going to have a strong person who's able to enforce his or her authority over all the government agencies, and then allow some of them to go off and sort of run their own programs. And the one program that is particularly concerning in Washington is the indications that there are some people within the Pakistani intelligence and security services that still have close ties with Afghan Taliban insurgents and so on, and have been encouraging them to fight. And so that's the problem. If you had a strong government that might be able to rein in that, but now you're allowing pretty much each group to run their own, basically run their own agenda.
Sohail, do you believe there to be a collaboration between the military and the Supreme Court in order to weaken the current government in Pakistan? Is that what's going on?
No, not at all, not at all. I mean, that is not the case at all.
What is the case?
Well, why would the military try to weaken the government, you know? The government is already weak in itself. The government has very serious capacity problems. There are very serious management issues, very serious governance issues. And the military is tied down, is bogged down in the global war on terror, and it's exhausted. We have been fighting for 10 years now. I mean, it's simply exhausted. The last thing that they would do is trying to destabilize the government, you know, or they have clearly indicated that they are not even thinking of a coup d'etat.
Well,
I mean,
I wanted to ask you that. Pakistan, as we know, has a history of coups. You don't think that's what's going on here? Is the army about to take power?
No, not at all. Not at all. I mean, not this time around. Pakistan has changed. I mean, you know, things have changed. There's a lot of awareness. The Supreme Court is asserting itself, you know. It is now the center of power. I mean, the civilian government is very weak. The military is a very powerful institution. There's no doubt about that, okay? But it is not about to overturn the Zardari government. It doesn't suit them at all. 9 years of Musharraf rule have discredited the military. The military officials do not at all. They are not at all willing to take power this time. As a matter of fact, they can't manage. No one can manage.
All right,
Pakistan
Talat.
is a very serious problem now.
Okay, Talat, you hear Sohail there saying that the Supreme Court is trying to reassess or establish its power. First of all, do you agree with that statement?
Well, I think it has been trying to assert itself. There's no doubt about it. It's trying to show that it's very autonomous. And I think since Mr. Chaudhry has become the Chief Justice, things have changed radically. The whole lawyers' movement, in a way, gave a lot of strength to the judiciary. And once they stood up, I think they have been able to hold up to their assertion, and they are an assertive and a fairly important center of power today.
All right. Having said that, it leads me to my next question. If they're trying to reassert the power of the Supreme Court, then can it truly be independent when it comes to the case of Zardari as well as Gilani?
Well, they could be to a great extent, but they also understand that any decision by them which will demolish the democratic structure would be extremely detrimental, not only for the country but also for their own institution, because their strength lies in a democratic dispensation, and they have experienced military rule when they were just mere puppets of the military regimes. And I think one of the great weaknesses of a military regime has been that all the other institutions of the country did get weakened. And I don't think they want that to happen to that extent. They understand that. But there is at the moment a convergence in thinking as far as this present government's performance is concerned between the judiciary, military, as well as the opposition parties, which is led by PMLN, which is Mr. Nawaz Sharif, and they all want the back of this government. So to that extent, there is a convergence, and then that is why you see that there are many people who keep saying that the judiciary also has the support of the military, which may not be true, but at least their thinking is the same, because they think that the performance of this government in terms of governance, in terms of the fact that they have been extremely corrupt and they enjoy a very poor reputation, they have not been able to solve the economic problems, hardly the energy problem. So I think there are complex issues, and to that extent I think many people, many institutions would like to see the back of this government. That is a different phenomena, but at the same time they want to preserve the structure, the democratic structure, and they do not want to give any opportunity that the military should step in or expand its influence. So that is also, they have to therefore do a very nuanced and a very balanced sort of an approach, even as far as legal issues and legal matters are concerned.
Richard Weitz, I'd just like to get your take on, we touched upon this just a few moments ago. What do you think about this possibility of a coup going on in Pakistan? Is that the likely scenario in your opinion? And how would the US feel about that?
Good question again, because they're interrelated. My thinking is that from what we've seen is the Pakistani military is not interested in seizing power as a corporate institution. So in other words, the military doesn't want to take over the government. It only recently relinquished power. Pakistan is it's suffering from, it's a very strong country in some respects, but it's suffering from a lot of weaknesses in others. And it's not clear to me the military wants to take over the country at this point in time, dealing with the separatist movements, the terrorism, the economic problems, and so on. If it did, it's not clear they would govern effectively. What we've seen is it's difficult for a military to run a country. We're seeing this now in Egypt that has evolved, and it's not like a century ago when it was a very simple matter of doing certain limited functions. Governments now have a lot of functions. In terms of, and one of the reasons also I don't think it occurs, related to your second part of your question, in that Washington would not welcome a military coup at this time. to put it mildly. President Obama, as part of the Obama administration's policies, has been trying to boost the civilian components in Pakistan. So whereas under the Bush administration, most U.S. aid went to the military, now they're trying to have it flow through the civilian government in order to strengthen civilian authority in the country.
And of course, Richard, this is all coming in light of the whole Memogate scandal that occurred. So how closely is the U.S. Watching developments in Pakistan as they unfold?
Well, it's a bit more interest than it might otherwise have been because Ambassador Gilani was the ambassador to Washington. And before that, he had been worked in a number of think tanks, including my own. And he had, he's well known in the United States and well respected as a proponent of civilian authority and liberal democratic principles. The evidence, to be honest, there's mixed evidence about whether the memo existed and who wrote it and what the message was. The U.S. government acknowledges receiving a memo that along the lines of indicated in the press, but they discounted it, which suggests it wasn't passed through an authoritative channel, i.e. the ambassador. But in general, there's a concern now for the safety of Ambassador Gilani. And this is a sign that the military might be able to exercise influence not directly by ruling the country, but through pressure they can exert on the different components, which would also not be welcome in Washington.
Has it started to do that? Is it trying to exert influence, Richard? And Sohail and Talat, I'll come to you in just a moment. But Richard, let me stick with you. Is the military trying to exert its influence through the Supreme Court, for example?
That it's less clear. It is evident that the military communicates certain messages to the president and prime minister, for example, how they treat Ambassador Gilani, how to respond to U.S. actions such as the recent cross-border incident. The influence on the court, you don't necessarily need to have that. I think that the Supreme Court, for the reasons we've already discussed, desire to reassert its authority after a long period of oppression, resentment on part of the judges and lawyers about how they've been treated in the past, and so on, is going to lead them to try and assert their authority against the civilian government, regardless of the military's position.
Sohail, you don't think that this is a coup in the making, as you're saying. Then tell me how much tougher you think things are going to get from this stage forward.
Well, things are going to get worse. There's no doubt about that. Well, like a coup, we've gone through this before. The military just cannot. No military can handle the situation, and they know it. Very serious governance issues, very serious matters. Political issues. And there's a lot of public awareness. There's a lot of support for democracy. Civil society is strong. The media is strong. And the Supreme Court has asserted itself. And again they're reminding, the military that they will not tolerate a military rule. So, no one wants a military rule. I'm convinced that the military does not want it come into power. There's no doubt about that, Okay, having said that,
what will happen? What do you think is going to happen?
But the military is still the strongest institution in this country. It is still the strongest institution in this country. It is running foreign policy. It is running security policy. It is running defense policy. As long as its opinion and its policies and its direction gets implemented by a weak civilian government, they have no need to bear all the responsibilities, So the memo gate, that is a very big puzzle. That's a very big puzzle, Okay, let me remind my colleague, the issue is not the memo itself now. The issue is that the memo is now behind the scene. The issue is that the Chief of Army Staff and the DGISI, the Chief of Army Staff, perhaps the most powerful man in the country, and the DGISI, a very powerful institution, they and Nawaz Sharif, who is the leader of the opposition, 2 times Prime Minister, and if things go along as planned, then the future Prime Minister of this country,
Right.
These three people, they have made allegations.
Okay, let
They
me
have
bring
made
in...
allegations.
All right, but let's just stick to this case for the time being. Let me bring in Talat, Masood. How much tougher do you think things are going to get?
Well, I think they would definitely continue to sort of press on this present government and apply pressure so that they go for elections. If it was possible for them, they would even like the elections to take place before the Senate elections in March, because that's a very crucial point, because once the Senate elections takes place, then there is every likelihood that because of the number of seats that they hold, the PPP, they are likely to win the Senate elections in large numbers and would have a majority.
Right.
And,
so do you think that the Supreme Court is going to or could possibly dismiss the current government come February 1st?
No, I don't think so. I think that will create a very major upheaval in the country, because that will not be taken that lightly, So I think they will have to be very careful if they took such a strong measure. Because as I said earlier, the problem is that whereas they would like to see the back of this government, but at the same time they understand that if they become responsible for removing this government in a judicial way, then it's quite possible that the burden might fall on them, and there could be an upheaval after that, because after all, PPP, despite the fact that its performance has been very poor, still is the largest political party in the country and has a huge following, and they can create problems in Sindh, in Balochistan, and also in many other areas. And there are also coalition partners in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province and also in Balochistan.
Right.
So I think it's not all that easy for them.
Okay, Richard, if the Swiss corruption case is reopened against Zardari and he's not immune from prosecution, then this could potentially open up other cases of corruption that are against Zardari, and we know there are plenty of those.
Yes, and of course, not only Zardari, there's been a whole series of corruption allegations against a series of civilian politicians there. And that's why they passed an amnesty law, just because they didn't want to have this hanging over people's heads. Pakistan's not immune from this problem. We've seen that in many other countries, Italy, Israel, and so on. And most recently Ukraine, where now the previous prime minister is now in prison. So this is a problem, because if they committed a crime, then they should be punished. But often the evidence of corruption or the fear of corruption is used as a weapon to try and it's a political game. So they really don't care about the charges, other than the fact that they're useful as an instrument to weaken an opponent. And this can lead to a perversion of due process and the law. And often the best answer is simply just to put these kind of charges on hold for an incumbent office holder and then deal with them after he or she leaves office.
Sohail, do you see that to be the case? Should these charges be put on hold, or should President Zardari just go?
Well, I don't think President Zardari is about to go. I mean,
do you think he should go?
If you ask the people of Pakistan, yes, definitely.
I'm asking you, do you think he should go?
Yeah, of course, I think he should go, but not immediately. I mean, I disagree with General Talat Masood. I mean, there's no change in the offing before the Senate elections. The Senate elections are scheduled. Everyone agrees, Early elections are going to be called somewhere in September or October. That is what the plan is, and there's a consensus on that. And I think there are indications that the People's Party, the Zardari government, they agree that there will be early elections,
Okay.
So there is a convergence on this, that there will be early elections, but not immediately, not at all.
All right, Talat, we just have about 20 seconds left on the program. I'd like to get your final thoughts, because you're a former military man. Who do you blame for this current crisis? Is it the military in Pakistan? Is it the government? Is it the Supreme Court, the Judiciary?
Well, I think at the moment, you know, the power is not completely confined to the military, whereas they may be the strongest institutions, but many centers of power have developed in Pakistan. It's the judiciary, as we talked about them. Even the parliament today, despite its weaknesses, is you have to reckon with that. And then the media is very powerful at the moment, and also the civil society. So I think there is a silver lining in Pakistan, despite all the present problems and challenges that Pakistan faces. The transition is moving, and there are great weaknesses, but still there are great strengths which other Muslim countries do not have. I mean, you have the most robust media in Pakistan today, and which criticizes everyone right from the president downwards. And then there is also this judiciary, as we talked about. So things are bad, but there could be better. So it may be the darkest moment before dawn. You know, it could happen like that.
Thanks very much to all my guests, Sohail Mahmood, Talat, Masood, as well as Richard Weitz. And thank you very much for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. You can always send us your feedback. You can email your thoughts to insidestory@aljazeera.net. Thanks for watching. From me and the whole team, goodbye for now.